I'm Clara Lynn, and I was thrown out of my own home at 18. While my sister stayed wrapped in comfort, I stood soaked in betrayal. My father told me I didn't deserve help, slammed the door in my face, and left me alone in the storm. But if you think this is a story about failure, keep watching. Because the girl they abandoned is about to rise higher than they ever imagined. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story travels. It started with a question I already knew the answer to, but I asked anyway. Why does Amanda get everything while I get nothing? My voice cracked through the living room like glass shattering on linoleum. The room was dim, the single lamp casting long shadows that danced across peeling wallpaper. I stood near the window, fists clenched, watching the rain whip across the porch. My hair was still damp from the walk home, my heart already heavier than my soaked shoes. My father, Ronald Lynn, a construction foreman with the temper of a ticking clock, lowered his newspaper just enough to let his bloodshot glare find mine. Because she deserves help, he said, each word a hammer. Not you, I blinked. I'm your daughter, too. You're 18, an adult now. Amanda's still figuring things out. She needs support. I'm figuring things out, too, I snapped, voice rising. But you never offered me help. Not when I was working night shifts at that grocery store to pay for books. Not when Amanda took my laptop and broke it. Not even when I came home with straight A's last semester. Dad stood, slow and deliberate. Don't raise your voice at me in my house. I laughed, bitter. Oh, so now it's your house, got it. Behind him, Amanda peeked around the hallway corner, arms crossed, smug in her fuzzy robe. She didn't say anything, but her silence screamed entitled. She was 20, technically older than me, but treated like a porcelain doll. She got everything, hand-me-downs that were never handed down, credit cards for emergencies that somehow always ended up at Sephora, and now apparently the last scraps of love I'd hoped still lingered in this home. You think you're better than this family now, my father sneered. With your scholarships and your ideas, newsflash, nobody owes you anything. I never asked for everything, I said, voice trembling. Just a little fairness, a little dignity. He moved toward the door. I thought he was going to leave the room. Instead, he flung it wide open. The wind howled in immediately, rattling the screen door like it too was furious. Then go find it somewhere else. My heart stopped. What? You want to live by your rules? Fine, go live by them out there. I looked to my mom, who stood frozen by the kitchen counter, eyes fixed on a dish towel she was wringing to shreds. She didn't meet my gaze. She didn't say a word. Are you serious? I whispered. The thunder outside cracked like the sky was laughing. No money, no coat, you want fairness. Dad said, jaw set. Go earn it. And just like that slam, the door closed behind me, not gently, not with hesitation. I stood in the rain with nothing but my hoodie and a pair of soaked sneakers. The porch light flicked off above me as if to say, don't even think about knocking again. The rain soaked me to the bone in minutes. My teeth started chattering, and every instinct screamed to turn back, to apologize. Beg, tell him I was wrong, but I wasn't. And I knew if I turned around now, he'd win. They'd win. So I turned the other way. The sky was a mess of gray and black, lightning stitching ragged lines through the clouds. Water pooled in the street, rushing past the curbs like it was trying to escape, too. My phone was dead. My wallet was still in my bedroom. My bedroom, which I wasn't sure I'd ever see again. I walked. No destination, no plan. Just the rhythm of my steps, splashing through the flood of betrayal. I passed shuttered stores, the laundromat with the broken, open 24 hours sign, the diner that used to give me free pie slices when I was little. The streets were empty except for the storm and me. And yet, somewhere beneath the cold, I felt something flicker. Not rage, not even grief, something quieter, stronger. Resolve. They didn't break me. Not yet. But they were sure going to regret underestimating me. The rain hadn't let up by the time I reached Rachel's apartment building. The cold was deeper now. It wasn't just the water soaking through my jeans or the ache in my fingers from clutching my arms across my chest. It was the kind of chill that burrows under your skin and tells you, you don't belong anywhere. I hadn't seen Rachel in months. We'd grown up together. Same elementary school, same neighborhood, sleepovers filled with whispered secrets and shared crushes. But life had pulled us in different directions lately. She went to community college downtown, while I threw myself into part-time jobs and night classes. Still, when I stared up at her apartment building, I prayed she hadn't changed her number or her heart. I buzzed her unit and waited, heartbeat thudding against my ribs like it was trying to escape too. 1 second. 2. Nothing. I was just about to turn away when the intercom crackled to life. "Hello." "Rachel," I breathed, my voice barely carrying. "It's me, it's Clara." A pause. Then the door buzzed open. By the time I made it to the 3rd floor, my legs were shaking, not from cold now, but from everything finally catching up to me. Rachel flung her door open before I could knock. "Clara," her eyes widened. "Oh my God, what happened to you?" I must have looked like a ghost, drenched, pale, trembling, and empty. Her hallway smelled like cinnamon and old carpet, and suddenly I was crying, not because I was sad, but because I wasn't invisible anymore. Rachel grabbed my arm and pulled me in. "Come inside, you're freezing." Her apartment was small but warm, and in that moment it might as well have been heaven. She shoved a blanket into my hands and ushered me to the kitchen table. "Sit. Don't say anything yet. Just sit." I tried to say thank you, but the words caught in my throat. My legs gave out the moment they hit the chair. I didn't even bother wiping the tears anymore. Rachel returned with a towel and a cup of something steaming. I hadn't realized how violently I was shivering until I wrapped my hands around the mug and tried to hold it steady. "Clara," she said gently, crouching next to me. "What happened?" I stared down at the tea. My reflection in the surface didn't even look like me. My lip was split. My hoodie clung to me like wet paper. I could still feel the echo of my father's words ringing in my ears. "They kicked me out," I whispered. "Just told me to leave, no money, no jacket, nothing." Rachel blinked. "Your parents," I nodded. "Why?" "Because Amanda needed something, again, and I dared to ask why it's always her. I guess they didn't like the question." Rachel stood abruptly and started pacing. "Unbelievable. Are you serious? What kind of God, Clara? Are you okay? Like really okay?" I didn't know how to answer that. Physically, maybe, emotionally, not even close. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," I said quietly. "I didn't even think you'd answer." Rachel turned, eyes fierce. "Of course I answered. You're my friend. You could have knocked at 3 in the morning and I still would have let you in." I swallowed hard. That word, friend, felt like a lifeline, like maybe I wasn't completely untethered from the world. "Thank you," I whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." Rachel's eyes softened. "You're staying here tonight. No arguments. I've got the couch and extra blankets, and tomorrow we'll figure out what's next." I nodded, but everything inside me was still reeling. As the tea warmed me from the inside out, I told her everything. Not just about tonight, but about the years of subtle cuts. Amanda borrowing my things and never returning them. My mom's sighs when I asked for anything. My dad's selective attention. How they celebrated Amanda's D+ as if it were a miracle but barely glanced at my straight A's. Rachel listened in silence, her face growing darker with every word. "They didn't even blink," I said finally. "Just threw me out like I was trash." Rachel reached across the table and took my hand. "They're wrong," she said simply. "You're not trash, Clara, you never were." I managed a weak smile. "I want to believe that." "You don't have to believe it yet," she said. "I'll believe it for you until you can." That night, wrapped in a pile of mismatched blankets on Rachel's couch, I stared at the ceiling while the storm outside finally began to quiet. The ache in my chest hadn't dulled. But for the first time in hours, I didn't feel alone. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing. I had survived the first night. I woke up coughing. Not the kind of light, dry tickle you shake off. This was deep and raw, like my lungs had been scraped out overnight and left hollow and aching. My entire body felt heavy, sweat-drenched, and shivering at the same time. Rachel's throw blanket clung to me like a second skin, and even lifting it felt like trying to peel away wet cement. "Clara," Rachel's voice floated in from the kitchen. "You okay?" I wanted to answer. I really did. But all that came out was another cough, sharper this time, jagged and painful, like my ribs were collapsing inward. I sat up slowly, blinking through a wave of dizziness. Rachel was by my side in an instant, her eyes wide. "Whoa, hey, you're burning up." She pressed her hand to my forehead and winced. "Okay, that's not good. How long have you felt like this?" "I don't know," I rasped. Even that took effort. "Last night you were shivering, but I thought it was from the rain." she said, already reaching for her phone. I'm calling someone, you need help. I wanted to protest. I didn't have insurance, didn't have anything. But the room was spinning and the floor felt dangerously far away. My lungs heaved again and Rachel muttered, "Nope, no arguments." The flashing red and white lights felt like a surreal nightmare. I could hear Rachel's voice explaining something to the EMTs as they loaded me into the ambulance, but I couldn't process it. I was too busy trying to remember how to breathe. Everything after that blurred. Cold air. The sharp sting of an IV. Someone asking for my name, my birth date, my emergency contact. That question alone made my chest tighten more than the pneumonia ever could. "I don't have one," I mumbled, eyes fluttering shut. I woke up in a sterile room, pale blue walls and the constant beeping of machines the only company. A nurse came in and out, checking my vitals, offering polite smiles, but never staying long enough to ask the questions I didn't want to answer anyway. "Pneumonia," she told me flatly, like she was reading it off a chart. "Your lungs are pretty inflamed. You'll be here at least a couple of days." "Is anyone coming?" I asked before I could stop myself. The nurse paused, her pen hovering over her clipboard. "We didn't have a contact on file. Your friend Rachel has been calling, though." I nodded, turning my head away. My throat burned with something worse than fever. I didn't even know what I'd expected. Maybe a voicemail from Mom. A single text from Amanda. A call from my dad, even if it was just to scold me for being dramatic. Nothing. No one. It wasn't just silence. It was deliberate absence. The kind that made you realize, not only were you not missed, you were barely remembered. The ceiling tiles above my bed were dotted with tiny holes. I counted them to stay grounded, to keep from spiraling into the weight of what I already knew. They weren't coming. I'd been tossed aside like trash, and even when I was lying in a hospital bed, strapped to machines, struggling to breathe, they didn't call, didn't ask, didn't care. I wasn't angry. Not yet. That came later. What I felt then was emptiness. The kind of hollow that fills your bones and settles behind your eyes like fog. I stared at the IV dripping into my arm and wondered what it would have taken for them to care. A funeral notice. Even then, I wasn't sure. The nurse brought me a tray of food I couldn't eat. Soup, crackers, juice, too bland to be comforting, too unfamiliar to feel safe. I sipped at the juice because I had to, not because I wanted to. When Rachel came by the next morning, her eyes were puffy from lack of sleep. She brought a tote bag of things, socks, a book, even a cheap, fuzzy blanket in pale lavender. "You're the only person who's ever liked this color," she joked softly, placing it over my legs. I tried to smile. It came out more like a twitch. "I called your mom," she said after a pause. My head snapped toward her. "Just once," she added quickly. "I thought maybe she'd want to know. Did she answer?" "She did, but when I told her where you were, she said, Clara's made her choices." Then she hung up. Rachel's voice cracked at the end. And that was when it hit, not the sickness, not the hospital bills I couldn't pay, not the burning in my lungs or the cold of the room. It was the confirmation. The final seal on what I hadn't wanted to believe. I had no family anymore. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed and took my hand. She didn't say anything else. Didn't try to make it better, just sat there. Steady, quiet. And in that silence, I let the tears fall. Not because I was weak, but because finally I had the space to feel it all. The betrayal. The heartbreak. The beginning of a different kind of strength. Getting discharged from the hospital should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like getting evicted from safety. I stepped outside the automatic doors in a pair of thrifted jeans Rachel had dropped off, and a zip-up sweater that hung off my shoulders like it had once belonged to someone much bigger. My body was still fragile. Every breath came with a reminder, tight and thin, like my lungs hadn't forgiven me yet for surviving. The hospital had done what it could. Stabilized me. Fed me. Printed out a neat little stack of papers with follow-up instructions, medication lists, and a cold, impersonal billing estimate that made my stomach churn. 3 days in that sterile bed cost more than I'd ever made in my life. $6,248. And that was just the beginning. Rachel picked me up and we drove home in silence. She asked me once, "You sure you're okay?" And I nodded too quickly, eager to get past the awkward pity hanging between us. I wasn't okay. Not even close. But I didn't want to be anyone's burden, especially hers. She had already done enough. By the next morning, I was online, searching for jobs I could do while still coughing between sentences. I didn't have many qualifications, just a high school diploma, a cracked phone, and desperation. So when the little laundromat on Maple Avenue posted a flyer in the window that read, "Help Wanted, Nights plus Weekends," I walked in and asked for the manager. Her name was Teresa, a stern woman in her 50s with practical shoes and the kind of eyes that scanned you like a barcode. She looked me up and down, took in my pale face, my too thin frame, and said, "Can you fold sheets?" I nodded. "Can you lift 25 pounds? "I think so." She handed me a time card. "Start Friday." Just like that, I was employed. No background check, no references, just necessity and a minimum wage that might keep the collections calls at bay for another week. The laundromat was always warm, humid from the machines, loud with the clunk of zippers and the constant hiss of steam. I folded for hours. Sheets, towels, uniforms. Repeat. Then clean the lint traps, wipe down counters, sweep the tile. The worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was the cough I kept swallowing down between loads and the way my arms ached as if I'd been wrestling bricks. Some nights I could barely lift the baskets. I'd stumble home with knuckles raw from detergent and skin cracked from heat. Rachel would be waiting with soup or toast or tea, always watching me too closely, always asking, "You sure you're okay?" "I'm okay," I'd lie. The first time she tried to pay my medical bill, I snapped, not at her but at the unfairness of it all. "This isn't your problem," I said too sharply. "I got myself into this. I'll get myself out." She didn't argue, just quietly slid the envelope back into my drawer and said, "Well, if you ever want help getting out faster, I'm here." The thing is, I didn't want to be pitied. I wanted to earn something, even if it was just the right to stand on my own 2 feet again. So I worked. Nights and weekends, one shift at a time, one folded sheet at a time. I counted hours like coins, each one stacked against that growing mountain of debt. And something strange happened, somewhere between the rinse cycle and the drying racks. I started to feel capable. I didn't have much, not money, not strength, not even a real plan, but I had work. I had sweat on my back and blisters on my fingers, and I had something Amanda never had, grit. One night after my shift, Teresa caught me scrubbing a gum stain off the bathroom floor. She leaned against the doorframe and said, "Most kids your age quit after 2 days. Too hard." I shrugged. "It's not that bad." She tilted her head. "You've got something, I don't know what it is, but keep going. Most people don't make it out, you might." That night, walking home under flickering streetlights, I smiled, just a little. No one in my family had said anything kind to me in months, not one word. And now this stranger, with her scuffed sneakers and coffee breath, told me I might make it out. It meant more than it should have. When I got home, Rachel was asleep on the couch, textbook open on her lap. I didn't wake her, just tiptoed past and whispered to myself in the hallway mirror, "You're still here." Not thriving, not healed, but still here, still trying. And sometimes that was enough. 6 months later, the cold had crept back in. Not just into the wind that screamed down Cleveland's narrow streets, but into my bones, into my bank account, into the quiet way I stopped checking the mailbox because I already knew what was inside. Past due, final notice. Rent delinquent. Account closed. The envelope flaps all looked the same, urgent red text shouting what I couldn't say out loud. I was slipping again. Rachel did her best to shield me from the weight of it, but I wasn't good at pretending anymore. My jacket was too thin, my shoes had holes, and the only thing keeping me warm some nights was the heat from the laundromat dryers, and now even that was gone. The layoff came quietly, almost kindly. Teresa called me into the back office after my shift. The heater rattled as it coughed stale air into the space, and her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Clara," she said, voice heavy, "I hate to do this. Corporate's downsizing. We're cutting hours. Yours are all gone." My mouth opened, then closed. I think I nodded. I can't remember. "I'll write you a reference," she added. "You're a damn hard worker." I don't know what I said in return. Something polite, I'm sure. Something too calm for what was happening inside my chest. I walked home in silence. The wind bit through my sleeves, whipped my hair into my mouth, and carried the faint sound of a busker playing something slow and mournful on the corner. I wanted to scream into that icy wind. tell the world I was still trying, that I hadn't come this far just to unravel again. But no one was listening. By the time I reached the apartment, my fingers were numb and my thoughts were a blur of panic and math. How long could I stretch what little I had left? The door creaked as I stepped inside. Rachel wasn't home yet. I peeled off my jacket and stared at the final notice lying on the counter, its edges curled from where I'd crumpled and smoothed it out too many times. You are hereby notified to pay the full amount due or vacate the premises within 7 days. 7 days. I sat on the floor and leaned my head against the cabinet, pulling my knees to my chest. The tears came quickly, hot, silent, and full of exhaustion. This wasn't like before. This time it wasn't just heartbreak or betrayal or the sting of being thrown away. This time it was the slow erosion of hope. The grind. The endless effort that somehow still wasn't enough. I had worked. I had fought. I had survived pneumonia, rejection, and months of burning my hands on metal dryer drums just to buy myself a little bit of dignity. And now I had nothing but overdue bills and empty cupboards. Rachel found me there when she got home. "Clara," she said gently, dropping her keys. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer right away, just held up the paper with a shaky hand. She sat down beside me and read it in silence. "Did something happen at work?" I nodded. "Laid off, downsizing." She closed her eyes for a moment. Then, without saying anything, she wrapped her arms around me and held on. I didn't tell her everything that night. I couldn't. I didn't tell her that my body had started aching again, or that I'd been skipping meals to make rent stretch, or that I'd pawned the necklace my grandmother gave me just to cover last month's electric bill. I just let her hold me, because for the first time in weeks, I didn't want to pretend I was fine. The next morning, I put on the same cracked shoes, zipped up the same thin jacket, and went out again. Not because I had a plan, but because I couldn't sit still. I walked past restaurants with help wanted signs in the windows, but none of them called back. I filled out applications with frozen fingers and tried to smile when the cashier said, "We'll keep your resume on file." That afternoon, I returned to find a yellow envelope taped to our apartment door. My name, a number circled in red. 7 days left, and still no job, no savings, just a clock ticking louder with every passing second. I don't remember deciding to cross the street. One moment I was staring at the eviction notice crumpled in my fist, the words swimming from the hours I'd spent rereading them. The next, I was stepping off the curb into the blur of afternoon traffic on Lorraine Avenue, my mind still looping the same hopeless questions. What now? Where do I go? How do I keep trying when everything keeps falling apart? I didn't hear the horn. I didn't feel the cold metal at first. All I remember is a sudden force knocking the breath from my lungs, the world tilting violently sideways, and the sharp crack of my body hitting asphalt. Lights burst behind my eyes, bright and scattered like shattered glass. Voices shouted. Tires screeched. Someone cursed. Then nothing. Darkness folded over me like a heavy blanket. When I came back to consciousness, everything felt muffled, soft, too slow. My eyelids fluttered open to the sterile white glow of hospital lights, the same kind of glow I'd prayed I'd never see again. My body ached everywhere. My arm was wrapped in thick bandages, suspended in a sling. A dull, throbbing pain pulsed behind my temples. Machines beeped steadily somewhere to my left. "Clara!" The voice was unfamiliar, deep, steady, careful. I turned my head slightly and winced. A man sat beside my bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Thick dark hair, must from running his hands through it too many times. A clean-cut jaw, eyes the color of storm clouds, full of guilt, remorse, fear. I'm Ethan," he said quickly. "Ethan Hayes, I am the one who hit you." His voice cracked on the last word. I blinked at him, still foggy, trying to piece together the moment, the car, the horns, the world spinning. "You didn't see me," I whispered, my voice weak. He shook his head, face twisting with regret. "No, I mean, yes, I should have, but you just walked into the street like you weren't even there. I slammed the brakes. I swear I tried." My breath caught in my chest. Had I done that? Had I really been so lost in my own despair that I'd stepped into traffic without looking? Ethan scrubbed a hand over his face. I thought I killed you. I rode with you in the ambulance. The EMTs said your pulse dropped twice and His voice trailed off, thick with emotion. I am so sorry. It took effort, but I raised my uninjured hand slightly. It's okay. No, he said firmly, shaking his head. It's not. You have every right to be furious. I stared at him, studying the way he couldn't even meet my gaze for more than a second without flinching. He wasn't putting on a performance. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't blaming me. He was genuinely terrified that he'd hurt me. Are you staying here? I asked quietly. Yeah, he nodded, swallowing hard. I didn't want you to wake up alone. I know that sounds weird, we don't know each other, but I couldn't leave after what happened. I needed to know you'd be okay. No one had stayed for me before, not family, not anyone. The room felt suddenly smaller, warmer, almost fragile. What time is it? I asked. A little after midnight. Have you been here since? Since the accident, he said softly. Yeah. I sank back into the pillow, overwhelmed. The last 6 months had taught me one brutal truth. People leave. People look away. People save themselves first. But this stranger, this man who had every reason to disappear as soon as the paramedics arrived, had stayed. Your arm is fractured, Ethan said gently, nodding toward the sling. The doctors said you're lucky. It could have been so much worse. Lucky. The word tasted strange, bitter and sweet at the same time. Lucky to be alive, maybe. Lucky that someone cared enough to sit beside me. Definitely. He hesitated, voice trembling just slightly. I need you to know something. I won't disappear on you, not until you're back on your feet. I stared at him, stunned. Why would a stranger make a promise like that? As if sensing the question I couldn't form, he added, because you looked so alone when they picked you up off that street. No one should ever be alone like that. His words hit deeper than he knew, because they were true. I had been alone. Until now. Ethan leaned back in the chair, eyes soft but determined. I'm here, Clara, he said quietly. For as long as you need. For the first time in too long, my chest loosened, not in relief, but in something gentler. Hope. Fragile but real. The hospital room no longer felt sterile. Somehow, over the course of a few days, Ethan had transformed it. He brought color into the corners. Bouquets of humble daisies in paper-wrapped jars. Little bags of chocolate mints. A crossword book I'd never asked for but used anyway. The air didn't smell like bleach anymore. It smelled like the chicken soup he brought in a thermos and the faint citrus of his aftershave. Every day around 10, he showed up. Like clockwork. Always with something small in hand and that same apologetic smile that had slowly softened over time into something more genuine. How's the arm today? He'd ask, leaning against the windowsill like he belonged there. Sore, I'd answer, which was always true. But still attached, so bonus. He'd laugh. The first time he did, I found myself watching him longer than I meant to. His laugh didn't just come from his throat, it came from somewhere deeper. Like he didn't take for granted that joy still existed. I didn't either. Not anymore. Our conversations started light. TV shows, whether the odd characters he met during his daily coffee runs. But slowly, they grew longer, more honest. One afternoon, he sat beside my bed with his jacket draped over the chair. It was unseasonably warm for November, and the sunlight filtered through the blinds in golden streaks. He brought me a coffee and a cinnamon roll and asked, very simply, So, can I ask something kind of awkward? I nodded, sipping the coffee slowly, letting its warmth fill the cracks inside me. Why didn't you sue me? He asked. For the accident, you had every right. I stared at the tray of food, chewing slowly. How do you explain that when someone shows you basic decency, it feels like a miracle? I've had worse things happen to me, I said finally. And the people who did them didn't stay, didn't say sorry, didn't bring soup. He tilted his head slightly. You mean your family? I nodded once, feeling the tightness rise in my chest like it always did. You stayed, I whispered. You cared, that's more than they ever did. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy in a good way, like we were finally standing in the same truth. Ethan didn't push for more. He just nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's not how it should be, he said gently. Family should show up. I gave a bitter smile. Mine showed me the door. He hesitated. If it's okay, can I ask what happened? I considered lying. It would be easy to say I was estranged or that things got complicated. But something in his expression, his patience, his refusal to pry made me want to tell him. So I did. I told him about Amanda. About the night in the rain, my father's voice like thunder behind me. about Rachel's couch and the pneumonia, about folding sheets and hiding hunger, about the eviction notice, about how I hadn't seen a single familiar face since the day I was cast out. When I finished, my voice was hoarse and my eyes burned. Ethan sat there the whole time, not once interrupting. When I finally fell silent, he let out a quiet breath. "They failed you," he said. "Every single one of them." I nodded, and this time I didn't apologize for my story. I didn't downplay it. I let it live in the room. Ethan leaned forward. "I meant what I said. I'm not disappearing. Not now. Not when it matters." Something cracked open inside me at that. I didn't know what we were yet. Not friends. Not anything more. Just two people in a hospital room sharing pieces of brokenness like puzzle parts. But I trusted him. And that scared me more than anything. Because I knew what it felt like when people leave. But Ethan had stayed. And that was something entirely new. I didn't expect his home to look like that. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. And for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. This time not from pneumonia or a broken rib, but from sheer disbelief. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Cleveland skyline like a living painting, the city lights flickering against the glass. Everything inside was sleek and warm at the same time. Dark wood floors, soft gray furniture, silver accents that caught the glow of strategically placed lamps. A faint scent of cedar and something clean and expensive lingered in the air. "This is your place," I whispered, feeling suddenly aware of my thrift store jeans and borrowed coat. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, almost sheepish. "Yeah, I should have warned you. It's a bit much." "A bit." I turned in a slow circle. "Ethan, my entire apartment could fit in your living room. Twice." He laughed, but it was nervous, like he wasn't sure I found it funny. We'd been spending time together since I was discharged, small things. Coffee runs, slow walks in the park while my arm healed, conversations that lasted longer each day. But this was the first time I'd stepped into his world, and it felt like a world built for someone else. He guided me to a plush sofa, the kind that swallows you whole. "I didn't bring you here to impress you," he said carefully. "I just wanted a quiet place to talk." My chest fluttered. A quiet place. With him. It sounded like something fragile and dangerous. He poured us 2 glasses of sparkling water from a bottle that probably cost more than my weekly groceries and handed one to me. His hand brushed mine lightly, too lightly, and my heart reacted like it was starved for gentleness. We talked for a while about nothing, the kind of easy small talk that tugs you slowly deeper. But I could feel it, a tension in him, a heaviness behind his eyes like he was holding something back. Finally, he exhaled. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you." The words hit my stomach like a cold stone. "Okay," I said carefully. He sat forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was steady, but his fingers interlaced tightly. "My full name is Ethan Vance." The glass in my hand nearly slipped. "Vance," I repeated slowly. He nodded. "As in Vance Real Estate, the Vance Towers, Vance Plaza." My voice grew small. "That Vance." Another nod. My pulse thudded in my ears. "So you're heir to it," he finished. "Or at least one of them." I stared at him, feeling my throat close. The man who brought me soup, who waited by my hospital bed, who listened to my stories without judgment. He lived in a world with boardrooms and private elevators and last names that opened doors I didn't even know existed. "And you didn't think to mention this?" I asked softly. He swallowed. "I didn't want it to change anything between us. I wanted you to know me, not my name, not my family." I stood up because sitting suddenly felt too vulnerable. "Ethan, look at me." My voice wavered. "I don't come from anything. I don't have anything. My family threw me out like garbage, and I'm still trying to figure out how to breathe again. And here you are, living in a penthouse with a skyline view and furniture that looks like it belongs in a movie." He rose too, closing the distance between us but not touching me. "I know," he said quietly. "I know how it must look. How it looks." My laugh cracked. "It looks like you're rescuing some stray girl who crossed the wrong street and ended up in your guilt-ridden care." His face fell. Pain flickered across his eyes. "Is that what you think this is?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I hugged my arms around myself, embarrassment burning through me. "Maybe, I don't know, I don't understand why someone like you would waste time on someone like me." He took one step closer. "Clara," he said gently, "I don't pity you." My breath caught. I admire you, he continued. You've survived things most people never face, and you're still standing, still fighting. That's not weakness, that's strength, real strength. The room felt too quiet, too intimate, too honest. You don't have to build anything with me, he said, softer now. But I want to build with you if you'll let me. I looked away, blinking back the sting behind my eyes. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But part of me still lived in that rain-soaked night, standing outside my parents' house with nothing but betrayal inside my chest. I wasn't sure if my heart could stretch across the chasm between our worlds. Not yet, but his words lingered, warm, steady, like a door gently cracking open. And the uncertainty between us settled into the room, not as a wall, but as a shadow neither of us knew how to name just yet. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be walking through marble hallways, shaking hands with philanthropists and CEOs, I would have laughed. Not a polite laugh. The kind that comes from disbelief and bitterness and disbelief again. But here I was, wearing a borrowed dress with satin sleeves that caught the light every time I moved, hair pinned in soft curls that Rachel insisted on helping with, and a name badge that read, Clara Matthews, guest of Ethan Vance. The gala was for a charity supporting youth shelters, one Ethan donated to yearly. The irony didn't escape me. Not after what I'd been through. Not after sleeping on Rachel's couch and coughing through hospital nights without a single word from the people who used to call themselves my family. But I held my head high. Because Ethan believed I belonged here, and somewhere deep down, I wanted to believe it too. He stayed close through the whole event, his hand at the small of my back, guiding without leading, never treating me like an accessory, more like a partner, someone he was proud to have at his side. I listened more than I spoke that night, observed, absorbed. The way deals were made over sparkling glasses, how the most powerful people in the room often wore the quietest expressions. I was learning. Ethan noticed. You have a way of reading people, he told me later in the car, his hand brushing mine gently. You don't say much, but you see everything. I turned toward the window, half smiling. I've had practice. He squeezed my hand once. That's what makes you different, and it's why you'll thrive in any world you choose. I didn't answer, not because I doubted him, but because I wasn't sure I believed in thriving yet. Still, week after week, he kept pulling me into his world, not to change me, but to include me. He introduced me to his staff, explained his projects with patience and transparency. He'd ask for my opinion during meetings with architects or nonprofit teams, and he'd listen, nodding like my perspective wasn't just valid, it mattered. And when he looked at me, it wasn't with awe or obligation, it was admiration. One snowy evening, after a fundraiser downtown, we stopped at an outdoor ice rink. Half a whim, half a childhood story I'd told him once about sneaking into a public rink with Amanda and falling flat on my face. I've always wanted a redo, I'd said. And he remembered. We laced up our skates and wobbled onto the ice beneath strings of glowing lights. Snow drifted down slowly, powdering his shoulders, softening the night. I skated ahead clumsily, laughing, until I turned and saw him standing still in the center of the rink. He held a small box in his hand, my breath caught. Ethan! He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. This isn't because I feel sorry for you, he said gently. And it's not because I want to save you. He opened the box. A delicate sapphire ring nestled in white velvet. Deep blue, not unlike the sky right before it breaks into storm. I want to build something with you, Clara, something real. Not out of pity or guilt, but out of all the things we've already survived and the life I think we can create together. I stared at the ring, then at him. You don't have to say yes, he added quickly. Not unless you feel it too. I did. God help me, I did. But the fear was still there, coiled quietly beneath the joy. I wasn't the kind of woman who got proposed to under fairy lights. I was the girl who got left on a rainy street with nothing but a bag and heartbreak in her chest. But somehow, both of those things could be true. I nodded slowly, tears brimming in my eyes. Yes, I whispered. His face broke into a grin, not the polished public smile he wore at galas, something softer, real. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's world. I felt like I had a place, still delicate, still uncertain, but mine. The fire crackled softly beside us, casting a golden flicker against the polished wood walls of the cabin. Outside, snow blanketed the pine trees, quieting the world into a stillness I hadn't felt in years. Christmas. My first in a place that felt safe. Ethan and I had escaped the city for a few days, retreating to the cabin his family used for winter getaways. It was quiet, intimate, the kind of space that invited honesty, whether you were ready or not. I curled into the corner of the oversized couch, my feet tucked under a thick knit blanket, a mug of cocoa in my hand. Ethan sat beside me, one arm draped loosely across the backrest, close but not pressing. The lights on the tree reflected softly in the window. His voice broke the silence, gentle and unassuming. "Do you ever think about them?" I didn't have to ask who he meant. My chest tightened and I looked down at the swirling steam in my mug. "Sometimes," I said quietly. "Not because I want to, it just sneaks in." Ethan shifted slightly, giving me his full attention. He didn't rush me. He never did. I stared into the fire for a long moment, letting the warmth seep into my skin before I finally spoke. I was 18. Amanda had just gotten accepted into some private art school. My dad was proud. My mom cried happy tears. They emptied half their savings to cover her first semester without blinking. I paused, swallowing hard. I asked for help too, just enough to get through community college. I wanted to study social work. Maybe help girls like me, the ones nobody sees. My dad looked at me like I'd just asked to rob a bank. Ethan's brows furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. He said Amanda deserved help, that she had a future, that I was always taking, never giving. My mom just nodded like that was the final word. I took a shaky breath. I yelled, I couldn't help it. I asked why Amanda always got everything, why I was always the afterthought, and then I looked up at him, tears burning in the corners of my eyes. He threw me out, no money, no coat, just slammed the door behind me and left me in the rain. Ethan's jaw clenched. I could see the fury he was holding back, but he kept his voice calm. "You were just a kid." I nodded slowly. I begged them to understand. I cried outside that door for what felt like hours. No one opened it, not even to check if I'd left. A tear slipped down my cheek, warm and humiliating, even after all this time. "I still don't know if they regret it," I whispered. "But I do know they never looked back." The fire popped. Ethan reached out then, brushing a thumb beneath my eye, catching the tear before it fell further. "Then let's make a new family," he said softly. I blinked at him. His gaze didn't waver. "One built on respect, on showing up, on never turning away when things get hard, not perfect but real." A slow, tremulous breath left my lungs, the kind of breath you exhale when you've been holding pain in too long. "You really believe we can?" I asked. "I do," he said. "Because you're not broken, Clara. You're whole, you were just treated like you weren't." I leaned into him, resting my head against his chest. His arms wrapped around me, and for the first time in years, I let someone hold all of me, the ache, the grief, the longing, and the fragile hope I was still trying to believe in. We sat like that for a long time, wrapped in silence and firelight. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, something else was rising. Something like peace, something like home. I never thought I'd walk up those porch steps again. But this time, it wasn't raining. It was Christmas morning, and the sky above Ohio was crisp and pale blue, with just a whisper of frost on the windows. I stepped onto the doormat of my childhood home in a designer coat, a soft cream cashmere blend that hugged my waist like armor. In my arms were boxes, lavishly wrapped with golden ribbons, each one hand-picked for Amanda's kids. Ethan waited in the car at the curb. He'd offered to come inside, but this moment, it had to be mine. I knocked. The door opened slower than I expected. My mother blinked like she was seeing a ghost. "Clara," I smiled gently. "Merry Christmas, Mom." She stepped aside without a word. I walked in. The house hadn't changed. Same faded rug. Same clock ticking too loud above the mantel. Amanda's kids shrieked somewhere in the living room. Then she appeared. Amanda, still wearing a plush red robe, her hair piled on top of her head. Her eyes fell to the gifts in my hands, then flicked to the glint of my diamond ring. Her voice was sharp with disbelief. "Where did all this come from?" I set the boxes down slowly, straightened, and met her gaze. "You got everything back then," I said calmly. "But I learned to build my own." Her jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" It means I stopped waiting for someone to save me. I stopped expecting fairness from people who never intended to give it. Dad appeared in the hallway, his expression unreadable. No one said a word. Not about throwing me out, not about where I'd been, not even a how are you. And that told me everything. I looked at the kids, bright-eyed, excited, unaware of the tension crackling in the air, and I crouched to hand them their presents. "These are for you," I said gently. "Merry Christmas." Amanda stood frozen, her robe tightening around her as if to shield her from the truth she couldn't admit out loud. I didn't come to gloat. I didn't need to, because I had already won. And as I walked back out into the cold, closing the door behind me, I didn't feel like the girl they'd thrown away anymore. I felt like the woman they never saw coming. The name on the interview schedule didn't hit me until I saw it printed on paper. Amanda Matthews. It felt surreal, reading her name on company letterhead, on my company's letterhead. The startup I had built under the Vance umbrella wasn't glamorous, not yet. We were still small, still scrappy. But it was mine. My vision, my rules. And now my sister was applying for a job here. I waited in the glass-walled conference room, hands folded on the table. The room buzzed faintly with the quiet hum of heaters and distant keyboards. Through the frosted glass, I saw her before she saw me, Amanda, in a navy blazer, holding a leather portfolio like it was the last piece of dignity she had left. She stepped inside, eyes bright and slightly nervous, until she saw me. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "You," she breathed. I nodded once. "Have a seat." She didn't move for a second, like she couldn't quite process what was happening. Then carefully she lowered herself into the chair across from me. "This is your company?" she asked, voice tight. "Yes," I said, "it is." Silence stretched between us. She looked at the sleek room, the laptop in front of me, the crisp notepad by my hand. Everything about this space screamed competence, and none of it aligned with the version of me she'd carried in her head for years. "I didn't know," she finally muttered. "That's okay," I replied. "Most people don't until they walk in." Her eyes flicked up to mine. "Are you going to humiliate me?" I studied her face. She wasn't sneering this time. She wasn't smug. She was tired. "No," I said softly. "That's not who I am." She swallowed. "Then why did you even let me come in?" "Because we're hiring." "And you applied." Her face twisted with confusion. "You really want me working here?" I leaned forward slightly. "This job's yours," I said, "if you work for it just like I did." No special treatment. No revenge, just an open door. Amanda looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was, or maybe she was finally seeing the sister she never tried to know. Amanda had been working under me for 3 months when it finally happened. Not the apology, I wasn't holding my breath for that. But the moment, that quiet, fragile moment where something shifted. She'd shown up every day, never late, never entitled. She asked questions, she listened. She stayed after hours without being asked. I kept my distance at first, kept things professional. She didn't ask for favors, and I didn't offer any. Then one afternoon, she knocked gently on my office door and stepped inside, holding a folder. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes uncertain. "Got a second?" she asked. I nodded. She sat down across from me, same chair, same conference room where our roles had flipped months earlier. But this time, there was no disbelief in her eyes, only humility. "I've been thinking about something," she said quietly, setting the folder on the desk but not opening it. "And I didn't know how to say it, but—" She paused, took a breath. "I'm sorry." The room was so still I could hear the clock ticking above the whiteboard. "For everything," she continued, voice tight. "For not standing up for you. For not seeing you, for watching them throw you away and doing nothing." My throat ached, but I didn't speak yet. She looked down at her hands. "I think they broke us both in different ways, and I didn't even realize it until I saw what you built without them." She glanced up, her eyes glossy but steady. "You didn't just survive, you thrived. And I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'd like to try to earn back whatever's left of us." I stood slowly, walked around the desk, and sat on the edge closer to her. "You're right," I said. "They did break us, but maybe—" I reached out just enough to bridge the distance. "Maybe we fix it together." She let out a shaky breath, nodded once, and smiled through the tears she wasn't quite ready to shed. We didn't hug that day, not yet, but something had started. Something real, something healing. As I watched her walk back out into the office, my office, I felt something lift inside me. It wasn't that everything had been made perfect. It was that finally I had the power to choose what came next. Not them, not the past. Me. I turned back to my desk, the city skyline stretching wide outside my window. For the first time, I didn't just feel like I'd survived. I felt like I'd written my own ending. And this time, it was one worth reading.